Guys, welcome back to Jovanier's channel. So with my recent purchase of Horace the Butler, I thought it would be interesting to compare Horace with the 2017 zombie from Lowe's. I'm just simply doing this because I thought, they're pretty similar in the ways that they just exist together. And obviously, they're 7 years apart. But I thought it would be very interesting to compare the two. So I guess we'll start from the bottom up. So probably the most noticeable thing is the bases are very different. So since Horace was 2010, Jemmy started using the pull-based stuff. I can't lift up his pants because his shoes are actually connected to his pants. In 2010, Jemmy started using or maybe it was a little bit before, started using the plastic flat bases instead of the button bases. And typically these have motion sensors in the bottom, sometimes they don't. I think the later pull-based ones don't. Usually the sensors are somewhere else, usually in the head or the clothing. But the 2017 zombie uses the seasonal vision style base, which is highly disliked, simply because it's to put it nicely, it's boring. But I think people just don't like it because it doesn't feel like Jemmy, it feels more like seasonal visions. So that's all I have to say about that. And then we move up to the shoes. Okay, so the shoes for Horace are pretty weird. I know that Jemmy sometimes used cloth shoes, and I'm actually not too much of a fan of that. But to be completely honest, I'm more of a fan of those than these really thin plastic shoes. I'm sure you've heard people complain about these. So these are like, could I not zoom in so much? These are like paper thin plastic. I would have much rather had them be thicker plastic, or, I would have much rather had them have a plastic base. But I really don't like either of these shoes, but I can put up with that, considering the rest of both of these items I like a lot. Okay, so moving up to the pants, this is actually going to be pretty interesting because the pants, and I'll get into this later too, the cloth for both of the items, it's different, but it's the same. So if I can just like grab a feel for this, and then this is like, this feels almost thinner than that. But I'm sure it's not. I actually think that's a higher quality. It's just a different type of fabric. This feels like a lot thicker, but I'm pretty sure it's not as thick. Or like it feels thicker, but it's probably not quality-wise. I mean, I really don't have to show this, but you know what the 2010 ones, the poles look like, and then the seasonal visions type poles. Okay. So as we move up to the torso, there's a lot to look at. I would actually say that the costume quality for the 2017 zombie is better than Horace. However, Horace's attention to detail for his costume is significantly better than the zombie. I think they could have done a lot more with the zombie than they did. They could have definitely done something with this where they added buttons instead of it being an obvious motion sensor. And the only reason that I say this is better is because Horace's is like a inflatable fabric for this part and then this part, whereas the 2017 zombie has actual like fabric all across. I'm pretty sure this is the same stuff. If not, this is just slightly different. I think these fabrics between the two are actually the same. I could be wrong about that, but they feel pretty similar, and they share the same stitching patterns, or not stitching patterns, whatever. Yes, but I feel like the zombie could have had much more detail than it does. I understand that it's a zombie and, it's not a butler, but I feel like the attention to detail is pretty lacking. The only real thing to mention, I guess, is just that he has rips in his shirt and then there's white undercloth, but it's still not as much as Jemmy had. And I have to say that older Jemmy, I really appreciate what they did, because Jimmy always paid a lot of attention to the clothing. It wasn't always just, basic creepy cloth and whatever. There was always something happening with the clothing. And props nowadays, they just don't focus on that. It's a lot of like what's up in the face, but I think everything else is important too. So I guess moving on to the hands. Now this is a pretty interesting one. And it's going to be a little bit of a bias because these hands, I actually dislike these hands. The only reason I dislike these hands is because they look very unrealistic and the paint job is pretty lazy. Whereas Horace's hands are pretty detailed. The paint job is nice and finished. I guess you could say they're comparable, but I feel like this one was taken much more care of. I feel like they cared more about the paint of the hands. Let me see if I can get under. I'd say the same thing about that hand. Whereas these hands, they don't feel the same. They don't. It's not the same thing, and they don't look as realistic, and they don't feel as real. Not to mention that Jenny seemed to have some sort of obsession, and I think it's just because they got cheaper, where the hand molds are actually two parts. So you have this part and then the one under it, and then they were like glued together. Whereas these parts were entire hand molds, and I think it was because these were casted from an actual hand. And I appreciate that much more because it's a significantly better look, and you don't have the weird like cut cross on the inside of the hand. So as we move up, we get into the heads. So this is actually going to be very, very interesting because I think this is where the two differ the most. As similar as they are paint job wise, obviously Horace takes the cake because there was much, much more care put into the paint job for Horace. Whereas the Jemmy Zombie, it was okay, but it seems pretty lazy. You can see that there's just paint everywhere. It looks like it was just airbrushed. It's very lazy. Very, very lazy. And Horace's, even though it's pretty basic, I mean, it's literally just the base of the white plastic and then the gray paint. But it's much more cared for, I feel. So aside from the paint, I think one thing to note is the fact that the mechanisms for the heads are actually... I think the mechanism that they did for this guy is better than this. I wish I could open this one up, but that's a lot of work. But basically, the difference is that this is a lot more compact. This is a lot more in one place. Whereas Horace's stuff is all over the place. And if I don't know if I'll be able to get it. I won't. But unlike the 2017 Zombie, Horace actually has a wire that comes out the back of his neck that you have to plug into the module. Whereas the 2017 Zombie just has, where it just plugs in and then you don't have to do anything extra. Now, that could be because Horace has eye movement and the Jemmy Zombie does not. But I could be very wrong about that. So, speaking of that, the Jemmy Zombie actually had full potential to have eye movement. There's actually, you can see, and I'll get deeper into this later, that there's this here. I had to take this apart. There's actually little screw holes that would fit for an eye movement, and these eyes have the things that would, I don't know what you call them, the pins that would attach so that the eyes can move. But I guess they just chose not to, and I feel like this guy would be a lot better if he could move his eyes. And I feel like they just lazied out on that one. Whereas obviously Horace has moving eyes. There's not much to say about that. So what I was saying about this, so you can see that there's like this gray stuff here. So in 2017, I actually had this guy outside and he tipped over and his face cracked. And I was pretty upset about it. I ended up fixing it. I wish I didn't do this though. I feel pretty stupid for doing this because now if I try to peel this off, this paint is ruined. The paint on the actual item. But, hang on. But I feel like I don't feel like this plastic is definitely more thin than this. I don't want it to, but this could probably fall over and the plastic wouldn't break. This falls over, this plastic is breaking, no question. It's like it's crazy. It's crazy how thin that plastic is. You'd think it would look thick from the outside, but it is thin. It is, I wouldn't say it's paper thin. It's not Sunstar paper thin, but it's pretty thin. Horace's plastic is extremely thick. I mean, just around the eyes, I can guarantee you that part of plastic is how thick. I bet it's thicker than actually what this zombie has. Basically, my conclusion is that Jemmy really cheaped out on this. I feel like it had so much potential, and I really do like this item. I actually really like it. But I feel like it could have been so much better. It had so much potential to be so much better. And these items don't have too much different with each other, and I feel like Jemmy just cheaped out. And it's really unfortunate, because this could have been the start of something greater. And obviously, as the years are progressing, we're seeing that the life sizes are actually getting worse, I think. And I thought this was going to be a great start for Jemmy, but it turns out that they just had 2017, and that was about it. I'm pretty sad to see that Jemmy tried, and they started out good, and then it just failed. I'm actually pretty upset about that. Their tabletop stuff is good, but their life sizes just suck so bad. Like this guy and the Black Widow, they were amazing. They were probably some of the best modern Jemmy props to come around. But they're just cheap. They've been cheapened, and I feel like that Jemmy has just left their past behind them. And they just don't want to pay any more attention to what they used to be.